So hello and welcome back to What is Science Policy Anyway? Today I have with me Dr. Veena Singla. Dr. Singla is Associate Director of Science and Policy in the Program of Reproductive Health and the Environment at the University of California, San Francisco. But without much more, I'll let her introduce herself and talk a bit more about what she does in her current role.
Thank you so much, Francheska. Thanks for inviting me on to speak about my career. I'm really excited to be here. And as you said, I'm the Associate Director of Science and Policy at our program. And broadly, we work to inform policies with the most current scientific principles and data to reduce and prevent harmful environmental exposures and protect human health. So we work on environmental health policies. So that's all about how the environment can affect people's health, whether that's the air you breathe, the water you drink, the buildings you live in, the products you use, the food you eat, all the different ways that our environment can affect our health. And as you can imagine, the environment can have a big effect on people's health, especially the most vulnerable populations, like pregnant women and children. Communities of color and low-income communities can face a lot more threats from environmental exposures like air pollution and industrial sites, and multiple environmental exposures and stressors that can affect their health. So in our work, we're really focused on making sure that the most current science and emerging research on the newest chemicals or new understanding about how chemicals in combination with other social stressors might affect people's health. All of this most current science, we're really focused on making sure that policies incorporate our understanding of how the environment affects people's health. And we work on policies on different levels. So at the local level, we're in San Francisco, so we've worked with the City of San Francisco Department of the Environment. On the state level, we've worked with the state of California, as well as being invited by other state legislatures to provide expert testimony, and on the federal level as well. So each one of these has its own sort of policy frameworks and different challenges. I think one of the really important things about the federal work is, though it can be quite challenging, and especially depending on the administration, when you get federal policies, that means that you can protect everyone in the country and have that, level sort of playing field and common protection for everybody. Not as much as we think it's important to protect people in San Francisco or California, we really want to have the same protections for everybody in the country. And we also have international collaborations where we work with organizations like the World Health Organization to bring the best methods for evaluating scientific evidence to their sort of processes and procedures.
Well, thank you for that introduction. One of the themes that I think you touched on was science policy is a very broad term. And sometimes people describe it as advocacy versus shaping policy. You did mention you have all of these different levels from academic to state to federal. Would you describe the type of work that you do currently more advocacy or shaping policy? I know they're very entangled, but basically I know that advocacy involves more lobbying, but you're in San Francisco, so I was curious about how you identify the type of work that you do.
Sure. So I think one thing that I really love about my work and that's really fun is that it is very kind of at the intersection of science and policy. So some of the work that I do, I think any academic scientist would kind of recognize, and that I'm doing research and analysis and writing peer-reviewed papers. So that's one part of my work that's very scientific. And then there's a part of my work that's much more policy focused as well. So like I mentioned, testifying to policymakers like state legislatures or Congress, or meeting with policymakers and talking to them, meeting with agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency or the Consumer Product Safety Commission and speaking with them. So that there's both of those pieces, and then kind of the intersection of those, in which we're translating what the science says for policymakers. So both communicate the science in a way that policymakers and the public can understand, and to provide the implications and recommendations of what the science is saying should be done, right? So I think that's the piece that goes kind of one step farther into the intersection, because the recommendation that always comes at the end of most scientific papers, right? More research. So we really go one step beyond that to say, what does the science say should be done, and how can we act on what we know now? Because there's always uncertainty in science, and there's always more we could find out, right? Scientists are curious. That's what we do. So of course we always want more research, but we also have to move forward based on what we know now. So I think that's the sort of intersectional piece. And so I'm at a university, at an academic institution. So we definitely do make recommendations for, based on the science, what we think the best approaches, methods, and policies should be. But, we do have to be aware of lobbying restrictions. So there's what part of the challenge is that we're scientists, and we provide scientific and technical information and recommendations, but we have to kind of maintain that line, right? Of we're scientists and we can advocate for the best science, but we're not lobbyists. And when we meet with policymakers and agency scientists, all what we're talking about is the science and the implications of the science, and what we should be doing based on that. So it's really important in our work that it's science-based, and that we're recommending the changes or policy approaches that are evidence-based.
Okay. So you kind of touched on this a bit. So right now you're in an academic setting, but you have been there for about a year now, correct? So basically, can you talk more about your career path and how you got to your current role?
Sure. So my background is in chemistry and biology. I did my undergraduate degree in chemistry, and then my PhD in developmental and cell biology, actually right here at UCSF. And about partway through my PhD, I started to realize that I love doing science. I love the science, but that staying in a research career was not going to be the right fit for me, because I loved the science communication aspect that I did, like when I was teaching and had some more of those opportunities. And I really wanted to take the science and help have it make more of an impact in the world. So as I was finishing up my PhD, I was really looking for opportunities that would help me do that. And I did a teaching postdoctoral fellowship at Stanford University, which was really fun. We got to do a big curriculum redesign of an undergraduate kind of cookbook biology lab to turn it into more of a project-based learning and like actually follow more of the real scientific process. So that was great. And I'd always been interested in policy as well. So as I was finishing up my postdoc and thinking about where I wanted to go next in my career, I really did look at kind of broadly for opportunities that would combine my interests of science and communication and policy if I had the chance. I think there's a lot of policy opportunities in DC, in Washington, DC. So it can be a little bit, more difficult outside of DC to find those opportunities. But I was open to it, and I looked. So I ended up at a small nonprofit called the Green Science Policy Institute. That's in Berkeley, California, and that was my first experience really working in science and policy. And I just loved it because I still was very engaged on the science. I was reading papers and talking to scientists and actually reading a lot more broadly than I did in graduate school, because for my PhD, I was so focused on my specific area. And now I really had the chance to read about kind of all the emerging science that was relevant in the field. So I was still very engaged on the science, but then really taking that science and being able to communicate it to decision makers and the public to put it into practice and make an impact. So I finally felt like I'd found the right fit for me. And so I was at the Green Science Policy Institute for a few years, and then I went to the Natural Resources Defense Council, which is an international and environmental nonprofit organization. And I continued doing work on environmental health science and policy there for a few years. And then I've been here at UCSF for just about a year and a half. So hold on just a second. So yeah, it's a really dynamic and fast-paced kind of job. I enjoy that. I'm still learning a lot every day, and there's kind of almost no typical day because we're working at that policy interface, and you never know what might be coming in a certain day when there's there's an announcement from the EPA or the administration on some new policy or news coverage on an environmental health issue, and reporters might call. So it's definitely different than the pace of kind of an academic research environment, which I really enjoy that kind of fast-paced and dynamic environment.
What would you say are the main differences between working in a nonprofit versus working in a policy position in an academic setting?
Yeah, I'd say in the nonprofit, organization, I was a staff scientist at both the nonprofits that I worked on. So I was doing both science and policy, but we were more advocates for sure, because both of those organizations were focused on public health, and we were definitely advocates for public health. So I think some of the things we could say in the communications that we could have could be a little bit more provocative and attention grabbing. I think in an academic institution, again, we do advocate for what the science is saying should be done, but we, just by its nature, academic institutions are a little bit more conservative, and we need to kind of have a different like ways that we communicate than sort of NGOs typically do.
And talking about communication, so that's something that's a theme. What would you say are like the top tips you would give STEM students that want to make the transition or work at the transition between science and policy?
I think one of my top tips is to try to take opportunities that you have during your education to develop your other skills outside of your science, because your graduate degree is really focused on developing your scientific skills, and those are key, certainly in a science policy position, but you also have to have a broader skill set, including science communication and translation, and project management and coordination, being able to communicate in a variety of formats, like written and presentations, and so I think any opportunities that you have to develop those skills, even if it's not directly related to policy work, but those opportunities can really help you make that transition, because you can demonstrate that you have additional training and capabilities to do, for example, writing for a non-scientific audience. If you have the opportunity to write about your research, like in a blog, or for your school, for other students to write in a non-technical way, all of those experiences can really help build your resume to be able to make that transition. So I think as much as you can, to take those opportunities that come your way, because they're really important. And I think number two would be don't be afraid to take some risks as you're looking to the next step in your career. It's the academic career path is very clear and very set, right? So you go to graduate school, you do a postdoc, then you go on to the next faculty step. So it's a very clear path. But when you're going outside of that, there's still not that kind of clear track set yet for careers outside of academia, or especially in science policy careers. So you have to kind of make your own path, and it might not totally be what you expect. I mean, when I went, my first science policy job was at that small nonprofit in Berkeley, and it was just getting started. They didn't even have an office yet. So for the first maybe 6 months or so, I worked out of the executive director's house. We only had funding for maybe a year and a half, and sometimes I wondered if I was doing something completely crazy, you know, taking a risk like that. But it really was such an important stepping stone in my career. So so to be open to doing something a little bit different in your career path that might be able to really be that stepping stone to where you want to go. And then I think related to that, the third thing would be to just be okay with some of that uncertainty in the process. I think that was one of the things that was the hardest for me to deal with, that kind of not knowing, because throughout my whole, you know, academic career, I'd always kind of known, okay, now I'm going to go to undergrad, then I'm going to go to graduate school, and just knowing exactly what the next step was. So once I decided that I wanted a different career path, I had to just be okay with the uncertainty and kind of just trusting the process. And that eventually I'll get to where I want to go. And I did. It took a little longer than I would have liked, but you know, to be okay with that, and to just keep motivated with looking for what is the right fit for you. Because once I found this career, it's made me so much happier and satisfied with the work that I do every day. So I think everyone can find that.
Well, that's an amazing points, and I can speak from experience. I'm currently in that spot that I'm a bit nervous about where things are going to lead. Anything else you would like to add related to policy, or maybe grad students that are wanting to transition? If not, I think so far it's been great tips, and we've learned a lot from you.
Great. I think just the last thing I would say is just to really encourage folks that are interested in science and policy to seriously consider these careers, because we need scientists in policy so much. There's really a lack of scientists engaged in policy work, and that's when we have the best science informing policy, that's when we get the best outcomes. So I would just really put in a plug for folks to think seriously about these careers, and I'm always happy to chat with anyone that's interested further.
That's great. Then I will make sure her email is somewhere in this video or in the description. But with that, I want to thank you for giving us a bit of your time. Thanks.
Thank you so much.